This is Time Enough, episode 2, and we're speaking to a lady called Renee Randall Hansen. And Renee, I've been friends with you on social media for a while, but this is the first time we've ever met. And I think the reason why I asked you to come up is because of, well, first and foremost, your story of how you've come to be on the Isle of Man and what you've been doing since. So you've been here for just over a year now, I think it is.
Well, first of all, thanks for asking me to come up here and talk about my experience on the Isle of Man. My first time I came here was in 2014, but I was only able to come a couple of weeks at a time due to work requirements and the small amount of vacation that you get from American employers. But then I retired from my job at the end of 2017. So I came over for several months in 2018. And then I was gone back to California from January through March. And then I've been back since April 3rd.
What brought you here then?
So I am one of those Americans with Manx heritage. So I was brought up ever since I was a little girl being told that I was Scotch, Irish, American Indian, and Manx. And of course, I was completely intrigued by what is Manx. And so ever since I was a little girl, I was flipping through the encyclopedias, finding just the little tiny paragraphs that talked about the Manx cat, about the heritage of the Isle of Man. So when I was finally able to, with work commitments and family commitments, finally able to come over and experience it, I did. And I just fell in love with it, and I plan to come back every single year if I can.
What is the family connection? Do you know much about your genealogy yet?
I know a little bit. I'm actually signed up for a class at the Manx Museum in a couple of weeks that will help me research more. But my father's side of the family, his great something or other grandmother was a Wade, W-A-D-E. And they were part of that big crew that came in about 1820 to 1840 to Ohio and other places in America. And she married a Randall, which is my dad's family. So I've been able to, with the help of older cousins that were very interested in genealogy in America, I've been able to get it back to 1700. And of course, I want to get farther back than that while I'm over here. But it's been amazing because I've actually been able to go up to Derby, to the church, and touch the fountain that my great 5 times removed grandfather was baptized in. And we just don't have that kind of history in America.
How did that feel to be able to do that?
Amazing. Isn't that funny? It felt amazing. It's hard to explain, but when I first came over in 2014, I took the plane into Dublin, the ferry across, and when I got off the ferry here, I just felt at home, which is funny because I'm from California and the weather couldn't be any more different, but I just felt at home. And then going up to Derby and going to some of the churches, the Lazaire Church and some of the other areas up there, it's just kind of an incredible connection feeling that's really makes no sense, but
no, I think it does, and I think it's something that seems to be prevalent within families and people who grow up in societies. Certainly, let's say, that were established in like the colonial period or just pre-colonial period, because, like you say, there isn't that connection to the real distant past within a place. You've got maybe 100, 200, 300, possibly 400 years, if you're lucky, of heritage in the United States, haven't you?
Right. That's true. And what I have found with even some of my own relatives on both my mother and my father's side, there are some folks that are really interested in going back as far as they can to kind of see what made us. And then there's other people in my family who think, this is me right now. This is my generation. These are my children. This is my life. And just kind of melding the two together and going back and talking about my stories and giving the folks that have a Manx connection a way from America to sort of experience it through me. That's why I'm so active on social media with both Facebook and Instagram and I'm trying to revitalize the lost art of postcards and letter writing. So I may be single-handedly keeping your post office in business right now.
Well, that's very much appreciated if that's the case, Renee. So you were saying there that the Wades, they went over to Ohio in that sort of period, 1820s, 1840s. Now, Ohio, as we're pretty aware here on the island, was almost like a hotbed. That was where the Manx seemed to go, certainly initially, wasn't it?
Yes, and I'm not exactly sure why. I'm sure there's an answer to that. Just like many other groups, like the Irish and the Italians, many went to different parts. You find big factions in Boston, Pennsylvania, New York, and for some reason there must have been some kind of a family connection. My family, the Manx, were farmers, and Ohio is pretty much the Midwest. And for generations after they came to America, they continued to be farmers. I have an uncle in Minnesota who was still a dairy farmer. So that was really, I think, the reason that they went to the areas that they started in, at least. And then, of course, America's very big, and so they were able to branch out from there. A section of my family went up to Michigan. There's a lot of my Manx relatives went to Michigan, and then slowly they went west.
Because Ohio as well, the location of the North American Manx Association. Have you had much contact with that association in the past?
I am a member.
Right.
I get the newsletters, but I haven't been able to go to any of their functions. But I do like following them on social media because they're always setting up their tents and going to festivals and keeping this Manx heritage alive across America.
And I think they come over here at least once a year, don't they, for the awards around July time, I think, as well. There's usually a representative that comes, I think.
I remember that they were across last year, for sure.
So you're saying that your part of the family eventually headed west, the old manifest destiny, I suppose?
Actually, my family in the Randall portion that married Nettie Wade went up to Minnesota, and then they stayed there for a long time. My father was actually the first one to go across to California, and that was because he was in the Navy, and ended up meeting my mother. So my dad's from Minnesota, my mom's from Texas. So you have the real North meets the South relationship. They met in California, and that's where I was raised.
Okay, so yeah, it's relatively recent, and this move. And whereabouts in California did you end up?
So I'm originally from a really small town called Ione. It's spelled I-O-N-E. It's east of Sacramento. It's gold rush country, Sutter's Fort, Sutter Creek, the Argonaut mines. And Ione was a little supply town that was booming back in the miner 49er gold rush days. And it's still a really small town. We just recently had a wagon train come through, and there is still a working gold mine up in Sutter Creek. And it's just a wonderful, beautiful little place to grow up. And it was a great place to raise my kids as well.
How has it sustained itself over the years then? Because I guess there will have been some drop off from that initial gold rush period.
Yes, that's a really, really good question. So Ione is in Amador County, and Amador County is east of Sacramento, and Sacramento is the capital of California. So you do have a lot of people that commute, and with the prices for housing going up so much in the Bay Area because of the .com boom, you have a lot of people that'll commute down there. Ione has had a juvenile facility, a state juvenile facility, since about 1860. And then in the 80s, during the prison boom in California, where they were building prisons, they built a prison in Ione. And a lot of people work at the prison. It's called Mule Creek State Prison.
Is this where you spent your time?
I did actually start my corrections career at Mule Creek State Prison back in the late 80s. And then I worked total of 7 prisons when I was working in corrections. And then when I retired, I was actually working for the Office of the Inspector General, which is the oversight agency for the California prisons.
Can you tell us a bit about your experience working within the American correctional facilities system? Because it's something that we see within Britain, I guess, within Europe, and it's very much a different model to a great extent as well. I think something that has maybe come in more within places like Britain in recent times is greater privatisation of these things, but that's something that's certainly been much more prevalent in the States for a longer time, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very interesting, the American correctional system. I am not an expert on it, and here's the reason why. The big difference between the UK and the American system, and actually it's both based on the same penological setup from way back when, and we both still pretty much follow that model of corrections, of punishment and rehabilitation. But in America, we have our federal prison system. So if you commit a crime against the federal law, you go into the Federal Bureau of Prisons. And then we have 50 states, and each one of those states has their own laws, has their own penal systems, has their own level of determining whether or not they want to privatize and go that route or stay all public. And then we have all the counties in California that have their own jail systems as well. So I can talk to you about California.
Please do. I mean, it's funny hearing you speak about these different terms, because such is the prevalence of American music, and the themes that are used in so many songs can be prison-based and people down on their luck and all this sorts of things. So you hear things like the county jail, the state prison, this, that, and the other. So it's interesting to hear you talk about it. And I guess if I'd really thought about it, I could have come to these conclusions myself. But sometimes when you hear them mentioned in things like songs, they just become like a lyric or something like that. You don't fully consider what it actually means. So it's interesting to hear you properly lay this out for us. So tell us a bit about your experience within California.
It's kind of funny that you say that, because if you work in California corrections, we have Folsom Prison, which is just north of Sacramento. So we all know Folsom Prison. I've worked at Folsom Prison. So of course you think about Johnny Cash and his Folsom Prison Blues. But we always laugh because in his lyrics he says he shot a man in Reno. Well, Reno is in Nevada. So Johnny, how did you end up in a California prison? But we still love the song.
Well, again, yeah, I've heard that song numerous times, and it's never occurred to me because, like you say, that doesn't really make any sense, but it shows you just how powerful a sort of a story or a narrative can be, imagery can be, without actually necessarily having to be correct.
Absolutely.
No one probably thinks any less of that song, even when they do find that out. Although maybe some within the prison system do.
Yeah, we still love it. We just kind of think it's an inside joke, that we know about. So now all of you know as well.
and then San Quentin is his other famous one, isn't it?
Yes.
That's down. Is that Texas way?
No, San Quentin is actually in California. It was one of the original 13 prisons. It's in Marin County. It's got a beautiful view.
Just north of San Francisco?
Yes.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
Right.
It's where our death row is. So if you are, or our condemned facility is in San Quentin, there's about, I think there's almost 800 inmates that are on condemned row. And actually just recently our new governor, Gavin Newsom, has put a moratorium on the death penalty in California. So while he is in office, they won't carry out any executions, which is causing a lot of in California we have a very diverse population. We have Los Angeles and San Francisco, which are very left-leaning liberal, and then we have a lot of, we are the most highly populated of all 50 of the states. So we also have a very prevalent conservative group as well. So right now in California, we have some folks that are really happy with the new governor's decision, and then we have others that think that, for the victims of those crimes and those family members, that it's really not fair to them. So that's kind of where we're at with the death penalty in California right now.
Because prior to this new governor, you'd had Jerry Brown for quite a number of years. Who
Yes.
I've always been amazed by his career.
Yes.
One, how long it's been,
Yes.
the way that he's had these two very influential periods and quite long periods as California governor, but separated by an enormous amount of time in between.
Absolutely, but he always stayed within public service. I mean, he was Attorney General for California. He was Mayor of Oakland, California. So he has dedicated his life to public service in California. I mean, his father was governor of California before him. And now it'll be interesting to see. He says he's retired to his ranch in Colusa County, but we'll see if he really does retire or if he stays involved in politics.
Because he's about 80 years old now as well,
he's
isn't
in
he, I
his
think?
70s. I'm not exactly sure how old he is.
No disrespect, Jerry, but he's a good age. So tell us a little bit about your experiences within the California system then, Renee.
So I've been really lucky. I had almost a 30-year career, and I could have gone longer if I wanted to, but I felt like it was time to, come to the Isle of Man and see what's going on over here. I started in Mule Creek State Prison, and I was able to kind of work my way up into other prisons. I worked at Pelican Bay State Prison, which was our supermax. I'm sure that it's been covered on one of your television shows here. So I've lived...
Yes, I've seen a program about Pelican before. I think it was, I was going to say maybe they sensationalized things somewhat, but what was apparent were the deep divides within it. So you had the African-American population, you had the Latino population, and you had rather a large neo-Nazi white supremacist population as well.
So our prisons in California are not segregated by race. They're segregated by gang affiliation. So we have a extremely bad gang problem in the California prisons. It's not just California. In your East Coast, in any of your big penal systems, there is gang issues. And so for the safety of inmates and staff, for many, many years, they were segregated based on who they identified with. Within your Hispanic population, you have Northern and you have Southern, you have your white supremacist groups, you have your BGF, your Black Guerrilla Family.
Bloods and Crips, I suppose, as well.
Bloods and Crips are street gangs, but they have recently, I think within the last 5 or 6 years, started to identify within the California prison. Our gang experts have started to look at both street gangs affiliation and prison gang affiliation. The ones I was talking about are gangs that actually started in either a youth authority or a prison.
Oh, okay, right. These are not ones that I'm aware of.
Right, you have Mexican Mafia. I didn't write them all down. There were 7 that were identified, and then within your white supremacist gangs, you have like the Nazi lowriders, and they've recently, like I said, within the last 5 years, sort of expanded that to cover more of a realistic view of what the gangs are like in the prisons right now. I mean, we have 35 prisons in California. There's over 100, and I think with inmates and those that are serving community parole, there's over 150,000 under some kind of correction supervision right now.
And would I be right in thinking that certainly for some of these gangs, when they start up with purely the prison-based ones, is it a case of self-protection in there, self-preservation to some extent?
Right. I think that a lot of these affiliations will start in the community where they grew up. Even though the prison gang itself started in prison, they're all in the communities now, reaching back into the communities. And then you are targeted, recruited. If you come into the prison system, sometimes starting in the county jails, the big county jails like Los Angeles, you're, as much as you want to not be affiliated with a prison gang, you're most likely going to be affiliated with a prison gang.
The other thing that really struck me on programs like this, which I've watched in the past with regards to somewhere like Pelican, is the game of cat and mouse that you seem to have to play constantly, where you've got the staff on one side and the prisoners on the other, in terms of the prisoners are always trying to work out ways of getting things in or getting things out,
Right.
be they messages or substances
yeah.
and all these kinds of things. And the way that the staff have to try and stay on top of this, the screening that goes on with all these things, and
Right.
it almost feels like you find one way of stopping something,
Absolutely.
and then the ingenuity of these guys, which let's not forget, they've got a lot of time on their hands to be figuring out how to do this stuff, and just the way that it would go back and forth seemed,
Right.
from the outside, fascinating. I imagine for you guys
It's
must
a
be
nightmare.
incredibly frustrating.
Right. Yes, contraband is a huge problem in a prison system everywhere, everywhere. In California, our biggest problem is drugs and cell phones. Cell phones are a big problem. They're constantly, the corrections department is constantly trying to find ways to stop them from coming in or to detect them. I think right now, remember I've been retired for a year, so I think right now they're working with technology that will actually jam the signal, so it doesn't matter if you have a cell phone or not. It's not going to work. You have, unfortunately, visitors that will bring in a contraband. You have drones that have dropped in contraband. You have, California is the third largest state in area, so we have prisons out in the middle of nowhere, and you will have people on the outside just drive by and throw over the fence bagfuls of contraband. And then you have some inmates that will actually escape for, a few hours.
Renee's just done air quotes there, everybody, by the way. Carry on.
That will escape for a few hours, go out and retrieve the bag, bring it back in, hope they don't get detected, and then introduce it into the population that way. And of course, unfortunately, there are staff that can be compromised to bring in contraband as well.
And it was, what was the other thing? It was sort of like messages as well. That was something that I was really intrigued by, where you get these like seemingly innocent letters and postcards which somehow have codes contained within them, which are putting messages back and forth in and out of the prison as well.
Right. They're called kites sometimes.
Kites.
They're a few years ago, for ever since Pelican Bay was built, part of the housing was security housing unit. It's called the SHU, security housing unit. And that's where you had your indeterminate sentences. So if you are found to be a member of a prison gang, you're locked up in the security housing unit. If you're found to be a shock collar, you were put into Pelican Bay for years. I mean, over 20, 25 years. And then just recently, over the last 4 or 5 years, they've looked at whether or not that was actually an efficient way. Was it actually stopping this gang activity? And the legislature, working with the management of the department at the time, determined that it wasn't. And so what you're talking about, I'm sure it still goes on now, but it was really those shot callers that were writing these very small, tiniest writing you could ever think of, or coded messages, whether it be on the telephone or in these letters. Now, the letters would get read by correctional staff, but the ratio of correctional staff to inmates is quite low. I mean, when I was working, I think with our correctional staff, peace officers inside and in our outside parole agents, there were about 40,000 peace officers, but that was dropped drastically. So things are going to get through. You're not always going to be able to decipher every code and say they're looking for those messages. They're looking for the contraband. They're looking for the drugs. They're looking for the weapons. They're looking for all of that.
What does working within a system like this and working with people, as in the inmates, What does that do to someone as a person, or does it depend on the person very much?
It's a really good question. I don't have a great answer for it. I started in corrections when I was 22. My parents worked for the youth authority. My ex-husband was a correctional officer. I can tell you that it's not a job for everyone. I've seen people in the job that are just in it because it has an excellent salary and really good benefits, health benefits. We don't have universal health like you do here. Retirement, the benefits are really good, but do the benefits outweigh the impact? It's not a job for everybody, in my opinion. But it was an excellent career for me. I was lucky, I think. I have a very positive attitude to start with. But I do know that I can be a little jaded at times because I've worked around a population that are felons. They've done everything in their power. In California, it takes a lot for you to get sent to prison. You either did an incredibly heinous, violent crime, or you've been in the county jail 5, 6, 7 times, and then you finally go to state prison. So by the time you go to state prison, a lot of them they have a criminal lifestyle, and they're going to do everything they can to keep up that lifestyle.
Sure, because I imagine on the one hand, for some people, it could make it incredibly difficult for them to not end up feeling very cynical, like you say, jaded, almost negative about humanity as a whole, possibly even. But then maybe does it also depend on how you feel about those people in there and their reasons for being in there originally, so does it depend on whether or not you think, well, this person is just a bad person, or this person obviously has had a hard life and has had bad things happen to them at some point, and whilst not excusing what they've ended up doing, it can at least make you maybe understand more why they've ended up the way they've ended up?
Absolutely. I think it depends on your level of empathy. I think it depends on your level of interaction with what your experience has been. If you've had a very negative experience, if you've been assaulted, all those sort of things. But I also think in California over the last decade, having been in corrections as long as I have, and I worked, I'll tell you a little bit about some of the policy work that I did, but you see the pendulum swing back and forth between punishment and rehabilitation. And the last 10 years, the department and the legislature under Governor Jerry Brown, he really wanted to put some emphasis on rehabilitation because these people are coming back into your community. It's funny, when I went up and toured your prison and talked to your prison governor.
That's Bob McCollum.
Yeah.
Because I've heard that he is much more of the progressive school when it comes to this sort of thing.
Well, the interesting thing is, on the Isle of Man, you go to work one day and you know everybody. You know those 100 inmates that you've got up there because they're your neighbors. You went to school with them. In California, we do everything in our power not to live next door to an inmate that's just paroled. However, the majority of them are going to parole back to a neighborhood, and they're going to be your neighbors. So the last, like I said, about a decade, the governor really wanted to put an emphasis on rehabilitation. So if you are a believer in rehabilitation, getting your degree, getting job skills, securing some kind of housing, getting a control of your substance abuse issues, if you're a believer in that, then your job can be probably easier.
Because there is that school of thought, isn't there? If you merely punish someone, and when their sentence ends and they exit the prison and they're stood there at the gates with, well, probably the stuff that they walked in with,
right? And I think $200 if that hasn't changed.
$200 and maybe a sack full of clothes or something, and that's just kind of like, well, there you go, you've done your time now, off you go back into the world. We've done our bit. There you go. And sometimes those people don't have those structures in place, don't have those things to go back to.
Right.
And so is it the case often then that they do end up reverting to old ways?
Yes.
Yeah.
The recidivism rate in California was astronomical. I think it was more than 50%. I think it was 70% would come back. And so under Governor Brown, they really started looking at whether or not there were community programs that could help reverse that. Because for one thing, it cost the California taxpayer an arm and a leg to keep them incarcerated over and over and over again. And then what kind of society does that leave you with?
Especially a society which isn't very keen on taxes to a great extent anyway, or certainly the concept of lowering taxes always seems to be a very, very popular policy thing. But speaking of policy, you were saying that you were involved with some prison policy.
Right.
What sorts of things was that?
So for the last part of my career, I worked for our Office of Legislation. So I was the legislative liaison for the department and the California legislature. And then under Governor Schwarzenegger, I was one of his point people for corrections for his 4-year term. So what I really got involved in was working with the California legislature and the various governors on what kind of policies they wanted to see in California implemented or changed. And we did our best to show the California legislature exactly what it was that the impact would be on their various laws. So that was from there. I went into the Office of the Inspector General. I was there for about 8 years, all told. And what the Office of the Inspector General does is it's an independent oversight agency. It's very small. We had less than 100 employees for the entire Department of Corrections, the juvenile system, and the parole system.
For the whole of California?
For the whole of California. So we really had to concentrate on what kind of oversight we wanted to do. And part of my role was executive director of our Rehabilitation Oversight Board, which made recommendations and oversight of the rehabilitation programs. So the Office of the Inspector General, like I said, it's very small. So we would oversee about 1/3 of the internal misconduct investigations, the most egregious misconduct investigations. The Department of Corrections would do their own internal investigation, but we would oversee it to make sure that it was on track, that it was meeting timeframes, and then we would do our own independent investigations and audits as well. We were divided into 3 areas: North, Central, and South.
How did you feel the work was received?
Well, the legislature appreciated our work. Of course, correctional staff don't really want an oversight agency looking over their shoulder at all times. But we had an excellent relationship with management because they, for the most part, welcomed what our findings were. Because we were such a small agency, we really did have to pick and choose what we were going to investigate. And we would have a pretty good idea of what we were going into and whether or not there was going to be the bang for our buck, for lack of a better term. We did sexual misconduct investigations. We did use of force, excessive use of force investigations. Anytime there was an in-custody death, we would do investigations or oversight of those investigations. We'd attend autopsies. We'd put together reports. We'd do special reports for the governor. We would look at particular prisons. We'd look at particular programs to see, like women's programs. We would look at, we did one report on an entire prison, High Desert State Prison, where there was complaint after complaint after complaint of inmates' rights not being upheld. So they were unable to file their own appeals. They were getting torn up. There was excessive force complaints. So just sort of the gamut, just wherever the legislature would get a lot of complaints about. But then we would also look at fiscal things too. Are the substance abuse programs working? They weren't, but they were costing millions of dollars, those sort of things.
How much do you think something like the legalization of cannabis how much of an impact do you think that has had on what's happening within the facilities in terms of the number of people that are being sent to them and that sort of thing?
I think it's personally too early to tell. California's still working out its regulations, the last I heard. And again, we have 58 counties in California, and each county determines what level of enforcement they're going to do for any of their laws. So you may have some counties like San Francisco that won't send anybody to prison for cannabis or any kind of drug. I'm not saying San Francisco doesn't, but I think it's much less prevalent than in some of our more conservative counties. So I think that for a long time in California, low-level cannabis type prosecutions aren't happening as much as they may have been in some of the other states.
When you deal with these sorts of things day in, day out, I mean, it sounds like even when you were out of the prison per se and working with the inspections instead, it still seems like you had a lot of time where you weren't dealing with sort of conflict necessarily, but difficult situations at the very least. Right.
Definitely. For me, it was a stressful job. And so you figure out how to deal with that stress. And
how did you?
I have really good family support, great friends. My crew that I worked with were fantastic. We would have a lot of meetings. We'd talk about how to deal with different situations, different management of different prisons. Some would receive us and welcome our input. Others we'd get a lot of pushback from. So recently, I think the Department of Corrections itself has started looking at different ways to help their staff deal with stress. It is it's a very violent workplace. I mean, I just recently saw that they had at Kern Valley State Prison in the Central Valley, they just had a melee involving 5 or 6 inmates where they had to actually shoot one of the inmates because they just weren't stopping. And think how stressful that has to be for that officer. So the department has started looking at implementing different ways of helping staff.
It sounds like it certainly can be the sort of job for people as well then that it's very, very difficult to leave it at the gates, let's say. You know, when you leave work that day, you know, you don't just instantly switch off. I imagine that's very similar for people that work in sort of social care and social work and all that sort of thing as well. Would that be the case in that profession?
That is one of the things that they say, right? Yeah. Leave it at the gate.
Easier said than done, though?
Easier said than done for some people. And sometimes you see that, unfortunately, play out with domestic violence, suicide. I mean, one of the things that I looked at when we looked at our high desert report was the amount of officer suicides. And that was one of the reasons that the department sort of stood up and said, okay, we need to look at this. Is it really prevalent? Which it is. There's a reason that the retirement age is 50 years old, because statistically, peace officer type positions, once you retire, you're going to die within 10 years. And that's just one of the reasons that they put that retirement age so young.
And have, like you say, those good benefits packages and the like as well.
Yeah, it's changed over the past couple of years, but it's still a pretty comparatively generous retirement package for sure. When I was in, we were able to retire at 50 if we wanted to, with up to a 90% top out. So you could retire with 90% of the top wage that you were earning.
So you would theoretically then have a pension that
a living wage,
sure. A pension that you could very much live on. Trying to take a positive from this sort of impact, is there maybe an element whereby it helps you to maybe enjoy, let's say, the simpler and gentler things in life a little bit more, to try and find beauty in the mundane or something like that?
It's gonna vary from person to person.
Yeah.
It's not all bad. I mean, I worked with some of the best people over my career, just the most wonderful people, and you do end up leaning on your partner, on your coworkers. And a lot of people are able to leave it at the gate. A lot of people are able to look at what they're doing within the prison system as a positive, making a positive influence, hopefully, on this person that's going to come out and be somebody's neighbor at some point. There's a lot of community involvement. A lot of these prisons in California are built in small communities. And so the number one employer, top employer, employing the most people will be a prison. And so they're the ones whose kids are out there at Little League baseball. They're the ones who are raising money for, the person who has cancer. I mean, they really, some of these communities really have a good impact from having a prison there.
Almost like, at times in the past where you would have like a factory town or a mill town or something like
Absolutely.
that. Of course, yeah. And you're saying about the positives. And do you ever get to hear the good news stories about former inmates, the people that do turn their lives around and go on to do good things as well?
Sure. One of the things that I enjoyed when I was working for the Inspector General was when we would go and we would do our audits of the rehabilitation programs, our vocational programs. So those programs that are teaching inmates how to weld, they're teaching inmates how to work a computer, they're teaching you how to do building maintenance. I mean, we have some excellent programs in the prisons now, and a lot of inmates would write back and tell these instructors about their job, about their housing. And they would have these letters and these pictures up on their walls in their workshops. And absolutely, they derive a lot of pride from the programs they're delivering.
I read Wayne Kramer's autobiography relatively recently, a former guitarist of the MC5 back in the 60s, who, because of some rather bad life choices, found himself within the US prison system. And that was a really fascinating insight, particularly to hear about someone who had obviously come from his background, and particularly because of what he'd been involved in that band. They were so much more than a group. They were political activists, obviously tied up with John Sinclair and the White Panther movement and all this sort of stuff. And being in Detroit at one of the most, well, let's say, combustible times of the city's history as well.
Sure.
But the way that he spoke about his experiences within the system, I think he was very much one of these people that did decide to use it as a positive thing. And he was talking about like the music programs that he looked to try and introduce as well. I can't remember the specific name of it. I think I know they named it Jailhouse Doors after a Clash song. Which I think maybe the Clash had written about him and his experiences anyway. So there was this sort of cycle that went within it. But again, that idea of him wanting to put something back in because it had somehow or other helped him get back onto the straight and narrow.
It's funny right now. The big movie in the theaters right now is The Avengers Endgame, of course, starring Robert Downey Jr. Robert Downey Jr. did time in the California prison system because of his drug use. And if you ever see any of his old interviews, he swears that it was finally being sent to prison and the help that he got in prison that was able to kick his drug habit. And look at him now. I mean, he's the biggest star in America.
And it's something that Kramer said himself. I mean, he took a number of times after he'd come out to finally get rid of his dependence on certain substances. But it's that idea of having to bottom out, isn't it? You've got to hit the bottom before you can bounce back. And some people could say it's a cliche, but you could say it's probably a cliche for a reason for some as well. That they do have to reach that real low before they can start coming back up.
I think about Robert Downey Jr. having been famous at the time he went to prison and all of the breaks that he had gotten before he was finally sent to prison, and that one judge that said, no more, you're going.
Yeah, wake up call.
And definitely a wake up call.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting avenue within it. That sort of thing. Did you have any dealings with quote unquote famous people in your time?
Famous for the wrong reasons, like Charlie Manson. Yeah. I mean, there were times that I would have to interview notorious inmates, such as Charlie Manson, who was just as crazy as You would think he was, Charles Manson from the Manson family.
So you sat in a room with Charles Manson and interviewed him? Sat across the table from him and interviewed him?
No, I stood at his cell door and spoke to him through his cell window.
Is that all that was permitted?
No, I'm sure I could have otherwise, but there was really no reason to put
Right.
myself in that position.
Sure, yeah.
For the interview. In California, we have notorious inmates that I'm not sure would be notorious to the rest of the world. Maybe. I mean, like the Melendez brothers who, Menendez, Lyle, and I can't think of his brother's name now.
They're not
yeah,
people
see,
familiar
it's
to
that
me.
sort of thing.
But if we take that Charles Manson example,
Sure.
then what was it like to speak to someone like that who is obviously so notorious? And when was this that you would have chatted with him?
Oh gosh, this was, let's see, it was probably 2012.
2012. So we're talking a good 40 plus years
Sure,
from when he
yeah.
first became infamous
Right.
with those Tate LaBianca murders, or certainly directing them as he did. So you're going to speak to someone that has this
Right.
not just
Notoriety.
reputation, almost this whole almost like mythology in a way
Right.
surrounding them.
Sure.
What's that like to come up against something like that? And someone who you're so used to seeing on television and in news reports and all this, that, and the other, and all of a sudden you're there speaking to them. What's that like?
Well, for me, the way I look at it is, at least I sort of already had an idea of what I was interviewing. When I would talk to other inmates, especially some of the gang leaders, all I knew about was what their criminal charges were. I didn't know about their mental health. I didn't know what their feelings were towards females. I didn't know any of the background. So I really, when you speak to someone like Charlie Manson, that you already have an idea of his level of crazy, because he was straight up crazy. I knew what I was getting into. And so there was no fear there.
No. Well, what was the interaction like then?
It was pretty lucid, actually. I was surprised. It was not, there was no, what's the word I'm looking for? I didn't really get any new information that I was looking for. We talked about some of the issues that he was complaining about.
So it was very much almost on like a, I was going to say something like, patient-doctor basis, but that's not what I mean. Sort of like, the person that runs, almost like if you owned a restaurant and someone was complaining that their soup was cold or something like that. Yeah, yeah. It was on that sort of a level.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I guess in a way must have kind of normalised things to an extent, or did it put you more at ease that it was just that sort of interaction?
Yes. Yeah, I guess you could say that, because it really was sort of trying to get to the root of some of the issues that he was complaining about, which we did a lot of for a lot of different inmates. So it wasn't as if there was an interaction with him where he was aggressive towards me. So it wasn't like that at all.
Or you were trying to get to the bottom of some deep-seated psychological issue or something like
that.
Right. Yeah. And is it difficult in those situations, be it with someone like Manson or a regular common or garden prisoner, that it's difficult to figure out when they're actually genuinely complaining about something and whether or not they're just trying to cause a bit of trouble, I suppose, kick up a bit of a fuss for no other reason than just, devilment, let's say.
I think that for me, I was always going to listen. If I received a letter that I was going to be looking into about a complaint, I would listen. I would not go in there with an attitude that they're lying. I knew staff that the first thing they thought was, "You're lying." Change my mind. Mine was, let me hear it, and if there's any evidence to support it, we'll find it and we'll address it.
It sounds like that's probably a much more logical or certainly honest way of doing things, because you're remaining open-minded until you have to think otherwise, whereas the other approach is you're starting off close-minded and having to asking someone to try and prise it open, aren't you?
I found it worked much better for me that way.
Okay. Let's move out of the prison.
We're getting out of prison?
Yeah. Is that okay for you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay, good, because we've been in there for about 40 minutes or so now. And it's fascinating, like I say, to have that sort of personal first-hand insight of that sort of thing. But I don't just want to talk to you about prison, because obviously you made this choice upon retirement to come here and to live a Manx life. You've been here for over a year now. So I think we still have to call you a come over at this time.
Oh, definitely.
I'm afraid, Renee. 1 year doesn't qualify you for stopover status or stayover status yet. But how have you found it then, actually coming here to live within the Manx community rather than just dipping in and out of it as you have done previously? Because judging by your social media, you've dived deep here, you know?
Yeah. So like I said, when I first came here in 2014, I just fell in love with it. And when I would have to get back on that boat, and I know there's one in the morning, so I'll watch what I say, or I'd have to fly back home, I wanted to spend more time here. And so I told myself, when I retire, I'll spend 6 months on the Isle of Man and 6 months back in California. I mean, I have 2 grown daughters back in California and all my family and friends. So that's what I set out to do. I rented a place in Castletown, which I love. I think I am in Castletown at the perfect moment. There's a lot going on in Castletown. And it's funny because in Ione, we have a castle, Preston Castle.
I read about this earlier today. That was the youth correctional facility?
It was a youth correctional facility, and now it's supposedly haunted. They've made a couple of Hollywood movies about the Preston Castle. They do tours of the castle. It's beautiful. It's really a cool place. So now my town on the Isle of Man has a castle.
Which, before the Victorian prison on Victoria Road, was the prison.
Yes. So I have a bus pass. I take the bus everywhere, and the Manx people can thank me for that, because you do not want me driving on your little roads. Last year, I took a driving lesson just to get used to it from Dave Corlett. I don't know if you know him. He just recently won one of the rally races.
Yeah, I know of Dave. So
yeah.
And
he was great, really patient with me. But after that, I decided, well, maybe I'll rent a car here and there. But your bus system is fantastic here. So I just buy a monthly bus pass, and I plan out my days based on that. I love your walking trails here. I try to walk as much as I can. Getting used to it, I will follow a footpath, and then I can't find the footpath signs anymore. Yeah. So luckily people are nice and tell me, which direction to go.
And thankfully on a small island like this, you're never too far from anywhere either. No. You're not going to end up like say if you went wandering in Southern California and something like that, in the Mojave Desert or something.
Exactly.
It could be quite
End
different.
up in Death Valley.
Well, exactly. So
but your weather, I mean today is the perfect example. It started out raining, then it got gray, then the sun came out. So I have to plan my walks and my trips hour by hour.
Yes, I think some friends of mine and we went to Austin, Texas 4 years ago, I think it was 2015, for a music festival there for Levitation. And one of the things that we were told about Austin, because we actually flew in during, I think, the worst thunderstorm they'd had in getting on for 100 years or something ridiculous like that. And the locals were telling us, and this felt very funny to a Manx person, and the weather we have here, that there's a saying in Austin that if you don't like the weather, wait 15 minutes. And coming from somewhere like the Isle of Man, we could completely identify with that. The extremes or the differences would be far more extreme, but it's still that thing of 4 seasons in one day.
4 seasons in one day.
California less so, I take it.
Well, California, if you have a hot day, it's going to be hot all day long, and then most likely the next 2 weeks in a row. If it's raining, it's going to rain all day long. But, we have a much milder climate, although we do have our ski resorts. We have Olympic level ski resorts up at Lake Tahoe.
Yes, of course.
So you can, we're in, the beauty of Sacramento in that area is you can go an hour and a half in one direction and be at the beach, hour and a half in the other direction and be on the slopes. So
skiing in the morning, beach in the
Sure.
afternoon kind of thing. Yeah. Well, we've got some beaches here at least.
yes, I love it here. I love beachcombing here.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, I like to take the bus up to Ramsey and walk the prom in Ramsey. They have beautiful sea glass up there, believe it or not. And just walk around, you see all kinds of gorgeous sea glass.
It must be so nice for you to be able to just go and explore the island at, sort of at your own pace and
Absolutely.
just find these things and find out what you like and where you want to go and all these sorts of things.
And it is a much slower pace of life here. And because I'm retired, I don't have a 9-to-5, finance job like some of these folks in Douglas where it would be more fast paced. But the lifestyle here is much more relaxed in general, I think. Nobody's in a huge hurry that I can see. And it did take me probably a good 3-4 months to really kind of, slow down.
I think that's natural. That's understandable. I think under the circumstances. What about the community aspect of over here? And because I think some people can imagine, coming from America, somewhere like California, you could imagine that there's a huge difference. But then you say you're from this small town, Ione,
Yes.
what, 8, 9, 10,000 people, something like that, is it?
No. If you count the prison population, there's 7,000. There isn't even a stoplight in the town. There's no fast food. I mean, it's a legit small town.
Yeah. So coming from somewhere like that within a vast state like California, was it easier for you to identify with the small community feel that we have here?
Maybe. I lived all over California, so I grew up in Ione, but then I lived in Los Angeles. I've lived in, some big cities as well. What I like, I'm not exactly sure even why I settled on Castletown. I knew it had good bus, now since the 22nd, the bus comes every 15 minutes. Yeah. So that's fantastic. But I love Castletown. I love being able to walk out my door, go to Radcliffe's, get my, fresh meat. I can walk to the co-op. I can walk to ShopRite. I can walk to get my coffee. I can walk to the gym. I see Jez the cat, our mayor of Castletown, in the middle of the square. Right now there's a renaissance, I think. I mean, we have the Secret Pizza Company. We have the Garrisons up and running again. We've got some cute little pubs and walking trails. You can just walk out your door, turn left, turn right, and find a beautiful walking trail. You can walk to Port St. Mary. It's just wonderful. So
has it been nice to get away from that car culture of back home?
Let me tell you, when I went home in January, I put on some serious miles. I love to drive. I do. But I am used to those big, wide roads, those big American cars. So I tried to do as much driving as I could to kind of get it out of my system, because now that I'm back on the Isle of Man, it's just that your roads are so small, and I did not grow up that way. I mean, you've got some fantastic drivers on this island. I more power to them. I just give them all the credit in the world, especially the bus drivers.
A lot of us locals would probably beg to differ about the
well,
quality
of course.
of some driving. Well, no, you're not wrong, actually. I mean, how those guys get those big buses,
the double-deckers,
through that little narrow bit between the castle and the glue pot and things like that, it never ceases to amaze me, because they just swing it through fearlessly. I mean, obviously because of years of experience, I imagine, but still, it makes it no less impressive. What's it been like to integrate yourself here, find friends and that sort of thing? I was really lucky when I came in 2014. I met a really great core group of friends that I've maintained till now. I am a loner, I do a lot of things by myself because people work. Everybody still has jobs over here, obviously. And so I do go out and do a lot of things on my own. And there's so much to offer here. You have great heritage sites. Your Manx Museum always has something going on there, usually for free or a few quid, as you say, and a lot of local music. I love all the stuff that goes on at the Gaiety, and on the little pubs are starting to, or I don't know if it's new or not, but
live music. It just seems to be happening a lot.
I think it's coming back a bit more. That it has been in certainly certain types of live music. It's been somewhat in the doldrums for a few years, I think, because the number of venues that we have, suitable venues for gigs, has declined. There have been a number of pubs which haven't existed for 5-10 years, which very much used to be, the sort of the core of a scene.
Right.
So even the building down the bottom of Douglas Head Road there, the Trafalgar, which is now a house, I think it's called Trafalgar House, for years and years was the Trafalgar pub, and that was, one that certainly when we were growing up and people a little bit younger than me that were in bands, that was a key one for them. There was another one just in town, which is now offices just opposite the Salvation Army, called the Corner House, which was very, very good as well. So a lot of those sorts of places have gone, and there was a bit of a decline. But I think one way and another, it is coming back, and particularly what you were saying about Castletown. I think you've come into Castletown at a nice time when there does seem to be more life coming back into the town.
Yes.
I noticed that you've thrown yourself into other things as well, like the marshalling at the TT. Was that?
Oh, I marshalled at the Manx. That was fantastic,
sorry, the
right?
Manx you were.
I don't think I'll marshal at the TT unless there's a call out for a need for more marshals, but marshalling at the Manx was a fantastic experience for me. I've never experienced anything like that. Road racing is not a thing in America. I mean, obviously the TT nowadays with television has become extremely popular, but we don't have anything that's the same. And being able to go up to the Black Hut and be in the middle of nowhere and with a great group of fellow marshals, some with a lot of experience, some from other countries like me. And I learned so much, and that core group was just so professional and really just had the best intentions for those riders. And luckily, I didn't have to encounter an incident, but it's just marshalling was a great experience for me. I may marshal at the Southern. They've had a call out, so.
And just down the road from you as well.
Yeah, I love that. I love that about Castletown is they have that Blount course that is just a great little course that has these world-class riders that come and compete there. It's amazing.
Did you have an interest in motorbikes and motorsport before you came here?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
My dad was a gearhead big time. So my being a petrol head with Ford Mustangs growing up, much more on the muscle car side, on the car racing side, drag racing to be specific. But yeah, I love that smell, and I love that sound, and I love the speed.
Tell us a bit more about how you grew up with it then.
So my dad restored cars. My cousin raced cars. He was always modifying it with nitrous or taking it down to the Sacramento Speedway. And so I would just go along. We drove incredibly fast everywhere we went. I got out of more speeding tickets than I should have when I was a teenager growing up. And then I would just go and spectate as much as I could. We were really lucky in Northern California. We have some great speedways. And then I was never into NASCAR. That's not, huge. NASCAR is huge in America, but where I grew up, there wasn't a NASCAR stadium. It's much more prevalent in the South. And the East, obviously, it's grown more, but there was drag racing that you could go see all over California or Las Vegas or anywhere.
And you're talking about 70s muscle cars. I think there's really something about those cars from that period that it's been a huge attraction for many people, I think, across the world, really.
Yeah.
There's just something about the design and, like you say, the sounds and the smells. It's so intoxicating, isn't it?
Absolutely. At least it was for me. And I don't know if it was because I grew up with it. I don't know if I would have loved it anyway. I think I probably would have, but I grew up with it, so...
And like van culture at all? Was that a thing around where you were? Having the vans where they have people had it all painted down the sides and the shag carpets inside and all that.
They were around. I think my sister, one of her boyfriends, had one of those Chevy vans,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they were definitely around.
And have you ever owned a muscle car of any sort or anything
Sure,
like
my
that?
first car was a 66 Mustang Fastback. Signal flare red, not orange.
That's a pretty beautiful car to have as your
Yeah.
first one.
Yeah.
How was that?
It was wonderful. It was great. Yeah, I was extremely lucky. And then from there, I had an 82 Mustang Fastback, and that was a beautiful maroon color. Too fast for me at the time, but hey.
And yeah, so in the motorbike side of it, then that came beforehand.
My dad had
too?
motorcycles. I loved being a passenger. I had boyfriends with motorcycles. I eventually took lessons and got my motorcycle license, but I don't have a motorcycle at the moment.
When did you become aware of the TT?
I had heard of the TT when I was a kid. I didn't know what it was. Just when you would read the little blurb in the big encyclopedia, it would talk about the TT. And then as I grew up and you start getting introduced to YouTube and some of the different medias, that's when I really started to understand what the TT was all about. And I knew I had to go see that. Any of the Irish road racing, and then the TT is sort of like the granddaddy of them all. And being able to come see that in 2014 just blew me away. I love the TT races and the Manx and all of that open road racing you do over here on the Isle of Man.
What was your initial reaction to seeing it live for the first time? Where were you when you first saw it live?
So the first year I watched practice in a few different areas. I think on senior TT I was up at Cronky and I have some great video. Really fast video, and some really good pictures from that time. But my just the speed, and you can actually feel the breeze. You can feel the wind come off of those machines. And it's just such a blur. And then going up to the paddock, there's nothing like going up to the paddock and just talking to these racers. And it was fun. I made it a point to follow the American racers because there's only a couple. And then I would have some kind of a connection back. And so you go and you talk to these guys and you talk to these superstars, and they're just so down to earth and so into the racing and so into their bikes and their teams. And there's just nothing else like it that I've encountered.
Were you ready for that sort of real... Because it's very visceral, isn't it? When you do see it first off, and especially if you're close up, like you say, when you don't just see the bike whiz past, but you feel it as well.
You do. And my favorite thing about being in those fields with church ladies making you scones, and it's such a part of the culture over here at every age. I would love seeing the families with what I call TT babies with their little headphones on out there in the fields watching these races that they're just going to be raised with. What a fantastic way to grow up.
It is pretty great in that respect. It was funny for me. I don't come from a family that are particularly into motorsport or anything like that. I had friends who were into it when I grew up, and I appreciated it, I think, to a point, but I was never really fully, involved in it until I came to work here. And then it was only when I started working here that I truly began to really appreciate just what went into it and how special it was. So it's always interesting to hear, the take of someone that comes over and experiences it. And it's great to hear that you want to get involved down at Ballown as well.
Absolutely.
Because all the people that work in it, are great, but that crew down at Ballown, there's something really special about those guys.
And it's so personal, because then they have the award ceremonies right in the square for all of those Ballown races, and it just feels like you're on to something special down there in Castletown with that Ballown, because they really bring it to their little community there, and it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, it's like you were saying before about how the community. It sounds a strange thing, but how the prison can be involved in the community in those instances in the States. Again, it's that thing that brings everyone together.
Right.
Everyone is involved with it. Everyone is invested in it to some extent or other. And it shows, I guess, again, just how people do and can come together over these things.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do you think then that Castletown was a good choice for you when you came over?
Castletown was definitely a great choice for me. It just felt right. It's where I wanted to look, and then I was able to rent a place that I love. Like I said, it's walkable to everything, and getting on that bus if I want to come into Douglas. The late buses run, so if I want to catch something at the Gaiety or a band playing at the Quids Inn or something, I can do that. What I find great right now about social media is all the Facebook events. I don't know how I would find out about bands, etc., over here on the Isle of Man if it wasn't for the Facebook events and how good the different sponsors and the different pubs, etc., are about getting these things posted. If you can think of another way I can find out about stuff going on the island, I'd appreciate any input you can give me.
I mean, there are things, the risk of a shameless plug, there are things such as like the What's On guide on Manx Radio's website, but I think you're right, though, in that social media these days, because the places that are putting these things on, or the bands themselves that are putting these things on, they're in control. So they can just be putting this stuff out. So more often than not, I think you probably are best off using those resources because you're getting it straight from the horse's,
from the source.
Yeah, straight from the source, from the horse's mouth. So I think in that respect, it probably does do you a lot of good to go along those lines. You were saying when we first started that as far as you could tell that the family when they were here, they were very much based up north.
Yes.
Was there not the temptation for you to go north as well?
Yeah, I love it up there. I really do. I love taking the bus up to Ramsey and walking around up there. I do have sort of an affinity for the north. What do you say, down north?
Down north, yeah, down Ramsey.
Which is interesting to me.
I think it's maybe to do with altitude rather than compass points. So, you say, for example, if you're going over the mountain, going on the mountain road, well, you go down to Ramsey, don't you?
Oh, you do? You dip down in? Yeah, okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
I'm not 100% sure, but I think that's the reason for it. Yeah.
Right.
Well, you're right. It is. That's the funny thing about the Isle of Man as well. You can think that it's so small, 35 miles by 15 miles, give or take. But there are so many different little pockets within it, and so many different little landscapes and things.
Last year, I was able to go to a couple of the garden shows where the communities open up their gardens. Castletown had a wonderful one. And then up at, is it Michael? What is that area up there? In the north,
there is northwest. There's Michael, the parish of Michael, Kirk Michael, and that sort
up there
of area.
They had one as well, and it was a great way to see these little hidden gems. And I love the fact that people are willing to open up their gardens to people to come and look at their beautiful flowers and landscaping and
some of the walled ones I think in Castletown are very special as well.
They really are. You don't know they're back there.
Tucked away until, like you say, you get that opportunity. So it sounds like that you've really sort of fully bought into.
I try,
island life and the community and everything. What does the future hold for you? How long are you going to be here, and how is it going to all pan out for you?
Well, that's a really good question. I have to always loosely base my plans because I do have 2 daughters back home, and
we're not even really spoken about your family to any great extent yet.
I have 2 daughters in their 20s. My daughter Allie, my younger daughter, was able to come out and spend 3 weeks in July. She was able to see some of the racing herself. She loved it. My daughter Katie is engaged, and so I may be a grandma, so I have to think about those things as I make my plans. But right now I'm going to be here through August. No, that's not true. I'm going to be here through July because in August I'm going to go do that cliched thing where you hike the Camino de Santiago.
Oh, wow, okay.
So I'm leaving on August 17th to do that. It's a 500-mile hike, walk.
I've read about it. I know people who have done it, and it sounds like an incredible experience. I think you're in for something really special there.
Yeah, so I'm really trying to challenge myself. That's another reason I love your trails here. It's excellent training for hiking the Camino.
Maybe not heat-wise, but certainly distance.
In August.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. It's going to be incredibly hot in the north of Spain in August. So
that's certainly something to look forward to in that case.
And then I'll definitely be back next summer. My plan is 6 months, but we'll see.
Very good. Well, Renee, I think coming up to about an hour and 20 minutes, which seems like a nice time maybe to stop and release you from this.
Thank you.
Because despite the fact that you weren't too sure beforehand about whether or not you'd have something to speak about, I think we've done pretty well there. What I asked John Caldwell when he was my first guest before he left, and I think I want to ask everybody on this podcast before they leave, is, with all your experiences in life, all the things that you've done so far, what sort of little bit of advice would you give someone, or what was your takeaway been from it all about how you should try and live, let's say? If that's not too difficult and deeper question to finish on.
You mean live my life overall?
Or just for anyone, yeah.
Right.
How do you think is the best way to try and be and try and do things?
Right. I would say that...
and what's important, let's say,
right.
as well, that sort of thing,
Right. I would say the way I live my life, and if I was to give unsolicited advice to anybody, is to start from love. When you're dealing with people, when you're dealing with situations, start with love and go from there. You don't have to empathize with other people. You don't have to sympathize with them. You do not have to put yourself in their shoes. But you might want to think about it. And if you start from a place of love, trying to find what you have in common as opposed to what your differences are, if you can start from common ground, I think you'll have a good go of it.
Renee Randall Hansen, thank you very much for joining me on Time Enough.
Thank you.